everyone. It's nice to be part of this evening session of Coffee with Bar. Our young members at the bar, Wilson Topas and Sai Vignesh, with the active guidance of Mr. A.K. Sriram Advocate, have come up with this idea at these challenging and testing times. The common word which we hear nowadays is only COVID-19, and it had been a real challenging and testing time for the humankind getting over this situation. And of course, as in any case, when challenges come across to us, we have people putting across with opportunities. And this is one such effort by Mr. A.K. Sriram on behalf of A.S. Kailasam Associates. This is the third in the series of these sessions. And today we have an evening session looking forward to have a discussion on essentials of practice at the DRT and DRAT. When we speak about the DRT and DRAT, we are effectively looking at the tribunals functioning in this country, tribunals created by a special enactment to address some specific situations. Now, justice delivery system is the basis of rule of law. Constitution of India had recognized the justice delivery system to be one of the basic structures. It provides for a hierarchy of courts for the administration of justice. And in that process, the tribunals became part of this constitutional scheme only by way of the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution in the year 1976. Till such time, we had only the traditional courts administering the justice delivery system. In 1976, when the 42nd Amendment came, it effectively introduced Part 14A to the Constitution by two articles, namely Article 323A and 323B. Now, these two articles provided for establishment of tribunals throughout the country. By one article, it effectively said that there shall be administrative tribunals in respect of disputes arising under the administrative side, which is part of the Constitution. Now, the other article provided that the state or central may establish such tribunals for certain specific subjects. In fact, it set out that certain areas where the tribunals can be established, like taxation, like land reforms, sealing, urban land sealing, foreign exchange, so many other issues. So they effectively the article provided that the government can come forward with establishment of tribunals. Therefore, the second category of tribunals became the tribunals established under specific statutes. So the first of such tribunal, in fact, more particularly under Article 323A, came to be established in the year 1985. Now, this tribunalization was not taken so lightly by the legal fraternity. As you all aware, the establishment of tribunals were questioned by an advocate at Chennai, namely Mr. L. Chandrakumar. So the judgment on the point is L. Chandrakumar versus Union of India, which went up to the Supreme Court. And that is the case where Supreme Court ultimately upheld the right of the state to establish tribunals for specific areas. Of course, the Supreme Court laid down certain guidelines, holding that there cannot be a discriminatory manner in which the tribunals can be established. It can be only under statutes, and the very purpose of the independence of judiciary should be ensured in establishing such tribunals was the point which was given by the Supreme Court in the judgment. Now, post that, this you are aware that is cases of L. Chandrakumar versus Union of India, which was reported in 1997, 7 SCC, 3 SCC, page 261. Now, post that, this issue had also been part of two other judgments. Now, we can be proud of, as members of Indian Chennai Bar, that all these issues were arose from Chennai. Because the other two judgments are R. Gandhi versus Union of India, which was decided by Madras High Court, holding that tribunals under the Companies Act cannot be established until the government brings in certain amendments and ensures the requirements as laid down in the earlier case of Chandrakumar. Now, this was taken to Supreme Court. Therefore, Supreme Court ultimately decided the issue in the case of Union of India versus R. Gandhi. Now, post that, we had seen a huge tribunalization which had happened throughout the country. as to many areas where tribunals were established. Therefore, there was one another case which was filed, namely the Madras Bar Association versus Union of India, which came to be decided in 2015. Ultimately, in all these decisions, the Supreme Court upheld the view that tribunals can be established as specialized bodies under special statutes for the purpose which it has been laid down. So therefore, we came to the reality that tribunals are going to have a say. Now, just I have to point it out as a matter of fact that in England, in UK, you have about 110 tribunals. Now, that was pursuant to a report of a lord in UK, and which became a special enactment, and they have a specific system under which they are maintaining. Now, as far as tribunals in India are concerned, these had been always under different statutes. The tribunals came to be established, and functions were designated in terms of the scheme or the objects under the statutes. So with this background, now we are today looking at the functioning of the DRT and DRAT. Rather, we are concerned for this today's session as to the essentials of a practice before these two tribunals. Now, the DRT and DRAT came to be established under a special statute. Now, this was in the year 1993. Now, prior to the statute came into place, there were various reports by the specialized committees which the government put in place in a context of certain developments in the economic activity. The primary concern was that as and when there had been economic activities happening, credit growth also sees a growth. And when credit growth happens or lot of economic activities on the financial sector happens, there were concerns as to huge non-performing assets which were also being created. Effectively, it means whenever there is a lending, and in terms of the contract of lending, the repayment, everything has to be met. Now, if there is a default or delay in such repayments, the assets in the books of the banks or financial institutions are treated as a non-performing asset. So this is what we normally call as an NPA. So this is a term derived by the Reserve Bank of India in one of its guidelines as regarding these financial sector reforms, where it spoke about prudential norms for these institutions on the asset classifications. Prudential norms of the assets classifications provided that if an asset of a bank or a financial institution is not able to generate the required revenue or becomes an asset in default or delay, then it requires to be termed as a non-performing asset. In terms of which the classification of that asset in the books of the bank or the financial institution is known as non-performing asset. So in the background of mounting non-performing assets, the government wanted a kind of a mechanism to be worked out. Therefore, they thought it fit that the experts in the field will sit together and make out suggestions to the government. That is how you have reports of Narasimhan Committee, and thereafter you had reports of Andhya Arjuna Committee, and you had two other reports of the same committees. On the basis of all these things, in the year 1993, the government came forward with the enactment called as Recovery of Debt Due to Banks and Financial Institutions Act 1993. Act came into force in June 1993. The Act primarily provided for the establishment of tribunals for the purpose of adjudicating the claims or the recovery proceedings of banks and financial institutions. So one portion of the enactment is the establishment of these tribunals, which we call as DRT, and an appellate tribunal, namely DRAT. The other portion of the enactment was that the mechanism which provided to the banks and financial institutions to make their claims before these specialized tribunals to ensure a speedy recovery of the dues. Now, once these tribunals have been established, in fact, in terms of the amendment which I spoke to you earlier in the constitutional provision, namely Article 323B, it said that for these particular areas, the tribunals can be established. It also laid down that while establishing these tribunals, the enactments or the government can set down what kind of procedures to be adopted, what kind of powers and jurisdictions to be vested. Now, while they set down all these things, the government was also empowered to lay down that there will be a bar of the jurisdiction of other traditional courts which we have been approaching earlier to that. So therefore, the DRT Act provided for establishment of the tribunals. DRT Act provided, rather enabled the banks and financial institutions to approach such tribunal with their claims. And once it is being provided, it also held that there will be a bar of the jurisdiction of civil courts in respect of those matters. So therefore, the Act enabled the establishment. Under specific provisions of this Act, the establishment of the tribunal was set forth, rather the manner on which. More particularly, if you see section 3 speaks about the establishment of the tribunals. Now, how it is provided is that the government, the central government, by a notification, can stipulate that there shall be a tribunal in a particular area. So therefore, by a notification, the tribunal comes into existence. Now, once this is set out, the other provisions of the enactment, namely sections 6 to 7, rather 4 to 7, provided as to who should be the person who will man these tribunals. A presiding officer is the person in charge of a debt recovery tribunal. Now then it lay down what can be the qualifications of the persons to be appointed as presiding officers. Now initially there were some provisions, later point of time there are amendments. Now in terms of the amendments, today the position stands is that a person who is qualified to be a district judge can be a presiding officer of the DRT. This was the original provision. Now later by amendment, they also said that persons who had been in service in the Indian Judicial Service with 4 years of experience can also be a presiding officer. Persons who are there in the executive, rather working as joint secretary level, working as a particular cadre with an experience, can also be appointed as presiding officer. Then it laid down what powers the presiding officer of the DRT will have. So effectively, if you look at these 3 or 4 provisions, it lays down, it pays down the way for the establishment, vesting with powers, vesting with jurisdiction, and all effective administrative judicial functions, everything. So under the scheme of these provisions, each tribunal is an authority for itself. Unlike the other civil courts which we look, we have a civil courts hierarchy as to municip, sub-court, district court, everything. Now everything works within one big system. Now under this DRT Act, the establishment of DRTs are individual tribunals or autonomous bodies. So this is the scheme of the enactment. So similarly, the Act also provided for establishment of the appellate tribunals. From section 7 onwards, it speaks about an appellate tribunal being established again by a notification. And who can be the head of the appellate tribunal is set out, saying that there will be a chairperson. Now, qualifications of chairperson, it again says persons who is a High Court judge or who is a retired High Court judge or who is qualified to be a High Court judge. Similar to the case of DRT presiding officer, there had been amendments to this provision also. So to some extent, it has been the scope of all these appointments, everything has been expanded. Now, only for academic purpose, not to deliberate much on it, you can take it that there have been issues on this issue also as to this appointment procedure, because the original decision of the Supreme Court in Chandrakumar case and followed with 2 other cases are that these appointment procedures should be in a manner that it ensures the independence of the judiciary. Rather, it says that you cannot be permitting these tribunals to function under the executive. So this is on the larger issues. Even till date, that system goes on. Very recently, the Supreme Court, in fact, struck down one of the enactment, which was passed as a finance bill in the Parliament, laying down certain terms and conditions of these appointments to the various tribunals. So they said that all these appointment procedures should be vested only with the Ministry of Law. So this is a different issue. Let us not get detailed into it. For the sake of today's deliberation, we will only take note of the point that establishment of the tribunals are under this particular enactment. So therefore, for any source of power or jurisdiction, when you think about DRT or DRAT, you should look into these particular provisions of the Act. Now, having said this, the Act provides that the banks and financial institutions, there is a specific definition for what will be a bank which is entitled to invoke the provisions of DRT Act, and what will be a financial institution which is entitled to invoke the provisions of DRT Act. All these definitions are there. Now, these institutions can approach the DRT by filing their application. So the Act provides that in a particular section as to the manner in which an application should be filed. It also provides for the rules which are framed The rules also specify what kind of format it has to be followed, what are the documents to be filed, court fees. So these are all small niceties which has to be taken note of. On a larger sense, if you see that, the difference which makes out as between the traditional civil courts and the tribunals is that civil courts function in terms of the provisions of Code of Civil Procedure. Now, tribunals are not bound by the Code of Civil Procedure. The tribunals are bound by specific provisions provided under the Act as well as the rules provided there. So, civil judges are persons who establish an independence of the judiciary in the sense that they don't work under any executive. They have their own freedom and independence established in terms of law. Now, as far as tribunal judges are concerned, to some extent, this is deviated because this has been repeatedly an issue before the Supreme Court also. Deviated in the sense, today the tribunals are functioning under the executive, and to some extent, it is sometimes a part of the departments of the executive. So that is what is the reality which is there. Take the case of DRT and DRAT. In spite of all these fights, these tribunals function under the Ministry of Banking Affairs. Even today, the Secretary or Joint Secretary of the Ministry of Banking Affairs has a say in respect of the day-to-day functioning which is happening in the tribunals. So this is the hard reality which we are facing. Now, therefore, under the Act, what is the jurisdiction of a tribunal? Now, how this jurisdiction to be exercised and what is the powers which are vested on these tribunals is specifically given under Section 17. Now, Section 17 says that this will be the area, this will be the jurisdiction, this will be the power which the tribunal has to exercise. Now, once an issue comes within this particular provision, and if it is within the adjudicative power of the DRT as to the claims being filed under the RDDB Act, the jurisdiction of other courts are barred. So therefore, for the source of power of a DRT, we have to look into Section 17. And 18 says that once it is within the jurisdiction of the 17, other courts will not have any jurisdiction. So 17 and 18 becomes very essential as far as DRT and DRAT are concerned. Now, having said that this DRT and DRT was established for the purpose of ensuring a speedy recovery process for the banks and financial institutions, did that end with that? It is not so. Now, what had happened is subsequently, seeing that there was not much of an effective mechanism as to the reduction of NPS happening after the DRT Act came into force, the government came up with a further enactment, namely the Securitization Act, which the Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Assets and Enforcement of Security Interest Act. In short, we call it as Securitization Act. Now, under the Securitization Act, these banks and financial institutions are given powers to enforce their security interest without intervention of court. Now, an adjudicatory mechanism or a grievance redressal mechanism under the SERFACI Act is provided, by which the concerned mechanisms are left with the DRTs and DRATs. So therefore, the DRT and DRAT also became part of the redressal mechanism or the challenges which are arising under the SERFACI Act. Now, in addition to that, thereafter, of late, in the year 2016, the government had come forward with Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is a very vast law which encompasses within itself various aspects of corporate insolvency, individual insolvency, like 3 or 4 enactments which are in place have been now brought under the single code. Now, it has 2 different parts. One, it speaks about the resolution of insolvency of corporates. So that is a different part of the code. Now, under that code, the adjudicating authority is the NCLT and NCLAT established under the Companies Act. Now, there is another part in the code, which is Part 3. Part 3 speaks about insolvency resolution and bankruptcy or the liquidation process of individuals and partnership firms. Now, in respect of this part, the said code provides that the adjudicating authority shall be the DRT and the appellate authority in respect of these individuals and partnership under Part 3 of the code shall be the DRAT. So therefore, today effectively you can look at these tribunals established under the RDB Act as now addressing concerns in 3 different statutes. It has gone to the extent that the very title of this enactment, which established the DRT and DRAT Act, has been now amended. After the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, it is now called as Recovery of Debts and Bankruptcy Act 1993. As I said, when the DRT Act came, the jurisdiction was in respect of disputes arising under the DRT Act, more particularly the applications being filed by the banks and financial institutions. Now, post-SARFAESI Act came, there was not of much issue because it was an enforcement without intervention of the courts, but a redressal mechanism was provided. Therefore, the jurisdiction of DRT and DRAT was extended as it is. But when insolvency and bankruptcy code came into place, it was a separate procedure as to approaching these tribunals under the particular code. Therefore, amendments came in terms of section 17A, which said that the jurisdiction of the DRTs will also be extended to the insolvency and bankruptcy codes for adjudication of disputes under the specific code in terms of the provisions of that code. So this had been the expansion which had happened. So I have given an outline as to the establishment of the DRT and DRAT being a specialized tribunal under a special statute. Then I have said that how the jurisdiction of these two tribunals, the original tribunal and the appellate tribunal, stood extended to the provisions of SARFAESI Act. Then I said about the DRT Act. Now with these backgrounds, let us get into the individual enactments and what is the role which these bodies play as regarding the adjudicatory process. Now why this has become essential is that as to a person looking at a practice before this tribunal, unless you get to know what are the adjudicatory mechanisms which are provided or what is the remedies which people are looking forward as between under these three enactments before these tribunals, will be the essentials which we have to ultimately learn at the end of the day. Now let us take each one as a separate case. Now take the case of DRT Act. As I said, apart from establishment, the Act enables the banks and financial institutions to approach for the recovery mechanism, which effectively means they file an application before the tribunal, asking the tribunal to adjudicate the debt due to them and make out a scheme as to how the debt has to be recovered by enforcing whatever securities they have. Now, this is provided under Section 19. Now, once an application is filed under Section 19, the questions which will come to us is that who can file this application? So, therefore, you will look into who are the persons who are entitled to invoke the provisions. The title may generally say banks and financial institutions, which itself has now gone a change because it now says Recovery of Debts and Bankruptcy Act. But what is required is that you have to get into the provisions and look at the definitions, and whether you fall within the definition will be the point. So if a bank or a financial institution fall within the definition, they will be entitled to invoke the provisions of the Act by filing an application. So this is one primary thing which we look at. Now, if you see at the definitions, when we speak about banks, we can take it for granted. It is almost all banks. Banks, there is no much of exclusion, be it nationalized banks or scheduled banks, private sector banks, any banking company which has a license from the Reserve Bank of India and carrying out banking activities in terms of Banking Regulation Act. Now, the next is financial institutions. There, they have made provisions that all state financial institutions or financial institutions within the definitions as provided under the Companies Act as public financial institutions, they are entitled to that. In addition to that, the Act also provides that the central government may, by notification, bring within its powers certain institutions which are carrying out financial activities to invoke the provisions of the DRT Act. Therefore, we have to look for all those things. Now, once they are entitled to approach the DRT and file an application for recovery, it becomes like any other proceedings before a court of law. So, you have to look at how these proceedings proceed. Now, as I said, when civil courts, you know the procedure under the Civil Procedure Code. Now, when it's a DRT, this provisions of Civil Procedure Code will not have an application. So, if it doesn't have an application, how does the procedure go ahead? Then you have to look into the provisions of that as well as rules. Now, Section 19 in its various subsections sets out. Now, one subsection at the first instance, subsection 1 would say like what will be the jurisdiction. Now, when we speak about jurisdiction, we are not speaking about the jurisdiction vesting of the tribunals under 17. Here we are speaking about the jurisdiction on territory. Also a concern about pecuniary jurisdiction, which we are known that each court has its own limits on pecuniary basis as well as territorial basis. As far as DRT Act is concerned, one thing which you can look at is that Section 1 itself where it provides for the commencement of the act, under subsection 4 says that any claims which are above more than 10 lakhs will only fall within the provisions of the enactment. So if there is a claim below that, you cannot approach the DRT. Now that provision also gave a room for the government to make certain amendments. It said that this amount can be varied, but it cannot go less than 1 lakh. So now therefore, by a notification of September 2018, if I am correct, it is on 16/9/2018, this pecuniary jurisdiction is raised to 20 lakhs. So today, any claim about 20 lakhs by a bank or financial institution as defined under the code alone will lie before the DRT. Then having said that, I was speaking about subsection 1. Now subsection 1 would say that territorial jurisdiction. Now earlier it used to say like any other civil proceedings where part of cause of action arose or where the defendants reside or carry on business. One interesting amendment came to this particular section 19(1), which provided that where the bank or financial institution maintains the account of the debt or the debtor. So where the account is maintained, that particular area will also have a jurisdiction. It has a kind of implication in the sense, take a case of a bank which is having a branch at Punamalli, or you take a case of a branch which is having a branch at Thiruvallur or some other place, any place outside the city limits. Now, part of their administrative action, these branches will also have their zonal office or regional office, their controlling authority in Chennai. Now, the banks have got into a scheme of establishing branches called asset recovery branches. They want all these defaulted loans, bad loans to be transferred to one particular branch and handling it. So, if in a case where there is an account with Punamalli branch, it is in default, the bank has to seek for a recovery of that default. In terms of the jurisdiction was provided under the DRT Act, the place that the tribunal which has a jurisdiction over the area at Punamalli will be the tribunal in which you have to file. Now, what happens after this amendment is that if this account is transferred from Punamalli to the Asset Recovery Management branch at Chennai, which is the ARM branch. Now, this branch, by virtue of these words, that they are maintaining the account of the debtor, will be entitled to invoke the jurisdiction of DRT. This is on the practical side of it. So, these small provisions has got a lot of meaning, because some cases may come to you where a defendant brings in a brief and the advocate has to effectively defend the brief. You will normally look into the jurisdiction of the first instance, limitation of the second instance. These are all basic things which we will say that whether this tribunal is entitled to. So therefore, you should not be carried away by the fact that, no, this branch is in Ambattur, this branch is in Thiruvallur, how come they are filed here? So you have to look into the provision and see that if the filing is done by an ARM branch, which is at Chennai, then the particular DRT which is functioning within that territorial jurisdiction has a. Then various subsections. Now, once the DRT has taken on its file a particular claim of the bank, it issues summons to the defendants. There are various niceties. We cannot be carried away by our traditional practice as far as these cases are concerned. What we would have done before a civil court is entirely different. Even in a civil court nowadays, there are various timelines. Earlier, we used to say that if a written statement has to be filed, tell the junior, okay, we take 1 or 2 days, 2 times. Let it go for 2 or 3 months, then we'll come back and we'll look into it. By the time we'll get all the details from the clients and file a written statement raising all our defenses. Now, interestingly, under the DRT Act, as far as these claims are concerned, there are various checks which they have put in by way of amendments. Now, the latest amended sub-provisions of section 19 says that once an OA is numbered and a summons is sent to the defendant, there is the summon itself is in a particular format as provided under the rules, which says that you shall not deal with any assets. You shall disclose the assets if the claim of the securities, if the claim is cannot be met by the value of the securities. So therefore, once you disclose, again, there is a restraint order saying that you cannot proceed with any alienation of these assets. So these kind of restrictions have come into place. And in addition to all those restrictions, any reply statement has to be filed within 30 days. Now that is become mandatory. And if there is a direction as regarding disclosure of assets, it has to be done. Now, interestingly, if you read one subsection, it says, if the disclosure is not made in terms of the summons which specifies that you are bound to disclose the other assets, there is even a provision for the DRT to pass an order of civil arrest. So this is the seriousness as regarding the procedures involved as regarding the various defense pleas which we have to bring about. Then having provided this, the sub-provisions also say that there is a right of set off, there is a right of counterclaim, all those things. Why I am saying this, the original provisions of the DRT Act did not have these provisions of set off and counterclaim. Therefore, when the enactment came in 93, there was a challenge before the Delhi High Court by the Delhi Bar Association who struck down the enactment as unconstitutional. Now, the Delhi High Court at the first instance in the year 1995 struck down the act as a whole, saying that it does not address all the concerns of the defendants. Rather, it does not make provision with regard to set off, counterclaim. And if there had been disputes between the defendant and bank, and if there is a cause for the defendant to sue the bank on any other counts. Now, the Delhi High Court found that this is all not provided. Therefore, the act cannot muster the constitutional mandate. And it also said that the independence of the judiciary is not ensured. Therefore, on all other grounds, on all these grounds, the act was struck down. Then it was taken to the Supreme Court, and in the case of Union of India versus Delhi Bar Association, the Supreme Court initially stayed and permitted the government to go ahead with the establishment of the tribunals, and ultimately the Supreme Court set aside the order of the Delhi High Court and upheld the constitutional validity of the enactment. Now, interestingly, in the meantime, amendments came to the Act in the year 2000. So therefore, the order of the Supreme Court records the fact that by way of amendment, now all these issues about set-off, counterclaim, everything has been provided. Then it speaks about what is the adjudicatory mechanism. Effectively, it says the DRT has to dispose of within 6 months, and if it is not able to dispose, it has to record reasons. Then it says once the pleadings are completed, you have to have a day-to-day basis. Now, in practice, though this is not happening, we have to be conscious of the fact that if you don't comply with certain things, your rights are likely to be affected. Rather, your client's rights are likely to be affected. As an advocate, we stand on a very responsible position at that stage to ensure that none of the rights of our clients are affected, be it the bank or be it the defendants. Now, even for the banks today, in terms of the amended provision, there is a mandate that when you file an application, you have to disclose what are the securities you have, what is the value of such securities, and if there is a shortfall to the value, to your knowledge, do you have any details of the other assets of the defendants which can be disclosed in the application? So these are all the mandatory provisions. Now, format, now the very pleadings, if you see, it is not as in the case of our civil court pleadings, where most was left with us. You have to plead as to limitation, you have to plead as to jurisdiction, you have to plead as to nature of documents, everything when you draft a claim, which you are aware. Now, under the DRT Act, the rules itself provides a format. There are about 4 forms part of the DRT rules. Now, the formats specify. It is all in a kind of type of question and answer. If you take clause 1, it speaks about name of the applicant. Clause 2, name of the defendants. Clause 3, jurisdiction of the tribunal. Clause 4, limitation. So what is required is that you have to only answer those things. You put it in some few lines saying that by virtue of these documents, this date, the claim is within the limit. Then it sets out facts of the case, of course, where you have to make all the pleadings under facts of case. Then it speaks about relief, interim relief, then court fee. So it is all a format which is provided. But when I look with my experience of about 20 years before these tribunals, though it is a format, there are 2 things which comes to my mind. One is that it is to some extent making it very easier for us, but at some extent making it challenging also. If you take it as a challenging, the proceedings before DRT and DRT is a real challenge to you, because very small enactment, it has about 41 sections and very small provisions, but still everything is provided under that. When I was speaking about section 19, various subsections, the courts have gone to the extent of saying that the DRT Act is a code by itself. Therefore, you cannot take recourse to any other provisions of law. In fact, DRT Act under section 22 specifically says provisions of civil procedure code will not have application. Then it says only principles of natural justice will apply. Now, subsection to section 22 says in certain areas, provisions of CEPC will apply as to issuance of summons, seeking attendance of witnesses, filing of evidence by way of affidavits, and discovery and production of documents, commissions, now review provisions, and cases of deciding the cases on default or ex parte and setting aside ex parte. Now, all these things, provisions of CPC will apply. Ultimately, the Supreme Court said the principles there has to have an application. You may not have a specific application of the provisions of the code of CPC, of the civil procedure. So therefore, the Act itself is a code as regarding any claims. the more it is said so, the responsibility of the lawyer becomes more. So you have to have all your techniques or your expertise in advocacy, everything within the provisions. And you would have seen that there had been very successful people exploring the provisions of this very small act, and litigations having gone up to Supreme Court. When I speak about other enactments, you will be able to more appreciate than the claims which are under the DRT. Now, having said about the claims by the banks and the adjudicatory process in respect of, now ultimately in a 19 application, in spite of all your counterclaims set up, everything, the end result is that there is going to be an order for the recovery of the debt. Now, when I speak about debt, one interesting aspect, if you have to see, is that debt is defined under this act in section 2G. To my experience and knowledge, one of the vast definitions of debt is found in the section 2G. It starts with saying any person, any liability. Two terms you can take note of in section 2G debt definition is that any person, any liability. So therefore, in Supreme Court, in the case of Eureka Forbes versus Union Bank of India something, examined this issue, and in fact it said that the very basic principle of a debtor and creditor is displaced by this definition under 2G. It said for a bank to maintain a claim before DRT, there need not be a debtor and creditor relationship. So far as the bank is able to establish that in the normal course of its business operations, there is a liability which has accrued to it, and there is a right for the institution to recover this money from some X, though he may not be a debtor to the bank. It comes within the definition of debt, therefore they are entitled to file a claim. So that case, in fact, interestingly, if you see, the appellant before the Supreme Court, Eureka Forbes, was not a borrower, not a guarantor, not a mortgagor. They were only a person who purchased certain goods from a company X, and that X company was a debtor to the bank. Now, these goods were hypothecated to the bank by the X company. Now, there is a default, there is a recovery, there is a liability to the bank. Now, without discharging the liability, the X company goes ahead and alienates this hypotheca. The company purchased the hypotheca. Bank sued the company as well as the borrower, saying that you are liable to pay me as a debt. Now, that was considered by the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ultimately said, yes, you are liable. Only point it held is that as a person holding the hypotheca, the liability of that person, namely Eureka Forbes, was only limited to the value. They will not be liable for the entire debt which the borrower originally was due to the bank. So this is one nicety of this enactment, one important aspect as an advocate which we have to know, the definition of debt under 2G. So having said that, in terms of an application under section 19, it ends with either a recovery certificate. It is very, very rare that we have seen that the OA has been dismissed. Of course, there had been cases where the original application of banks and financial institutions have been dismissed, and with my experience, I myself had seen so many cases where on the question of limitation, where on the question of procedural irregularities. As I said, the act, the provisions of the act as well as rules makes out what is the format, what is the documents, everything to be filed. Interestingly, there is an amendment to the act which also says that when we speak about documents, it includes the statement of account as per the Bankers' Books of Evidence Act. Though this particular amended provision was not there earlier, still whenever a bank relies upon a statement of account, it has to satisfy the requirements of a Bankers' Books of Evidence Act, because bank does not produce the entire ledger before the court. Bank only brings up a statement as to debits and credits and ultimately say that there is a debit balance, you pay me the balance. This is the bank's claim. Now, as regarding this particular statement of account, it has to satisfy the requirements of Bankers' Books of Evidence Act. And Supreme Court, in one case of the Canara Bank versus Ravindra, had an occasion to deal with it. It recorded into one paragraph, this paragraph 72 or something, where it said, banker statements nowadays are illegible entries. It does not give a description. It does not speak about what is the rate of interest applied. It does not speak about what is the basis on which a particular debit is there, what is the cost. So Supreme Court disallowed all these things. Supreme Court said that if it does not satisfy these requirements, it cannot be. Now, very essential requirement is that it has to be certified that this statement of account is from the regular ledgers of the bank maintained in the normal course of business transaction. So having said, so this is the basis on which a recovery certificate. So therefore, it ends with an order by the DRT for recovery of the money, which comes in the nature of a recovery certificate. Now, does the adjudication end with this? under the DRT Act, does the adjudication end with this? Interestingly, it does not end with this. In fact, as a practicing lawyers, it is our concern to see that there is some more scope on it. It is in fact provided under that. As in the earlier case of decrees of civil court, we know that more than obtaining a decree before a civil court, the more challenging thing was on the execution side. You might have experienced that execution petitions pending for years. Defeat of a claim in an execution petition has happened more than a defeat of a claim in a civil original suit. So there are various provisions under the Civil Procedure Code as to manner of execution. So is there any such thing which is also there under the DRT Act? It is there. Now the DRT Act itself provides that a recovery officer is the person who will execute the recovery certificate issued by the presiding officer. Now he is also a functionary staff of the DRT. Now he has adjudicatory powers. Now section 25 to 27. 25 specifically says modes of recovery. And 26 it says what are all the areas which has to be 27, 28, and it goes up to 29. A very important section is section 29. Section 29 reads into the DRT Act the provisions of second and third schedules of the Income Tax Act. So this is the effective enabling provision of a recovery officer for executing the recovery certificate and ensuring the recovery in terms of the final order of the DRT. So there, if you go and see second schedule and third schedule of the Income Tax Act, second schedule provides for mechanisms as to the recovery as well as the powers of the recovery officer. Rule 9 of the second schedule again says that whatever jurisdiction the recovery officer has, that jurisdiction cannot be exercised by any other court. So therefore, there is one more bar of the jurisdiction of civil court, even in the recovery proceedings. Now, having said that, if there had been some third-party claims, how it will happen? Post-recovery certificate, there is a recovery certificate and it says that the debt can be recovered by enforcing some property. Now, there is a third party who has either purchased, who had got a transaction much earlier to the mortgage, or who is entirely a third party. For some reason, this property is also brought into within the adjudication on the OA. Now, what will be his rights? And he was not aware about the original proceedings before the presiding officer. Rule 11 provides for those situations also. Likewise, the second schedule to the Income Tax Act has various adjudications. Now, third-party rights post sale of a property. Now, if there is a requirement to stop the sale, if there is a case where the debtor wants to discharge even at that stage. Now, there are specific rules under the second schedule. Rule 60 to 63 enables that he can make an application to the recovery officer so that he can stop all the proceedings and ensure that the payment is made and the property is released. Likewise, under the third schedule, procedural aspects are there. Once a recovery certificate is issued, how it has to be executed. It says that there is a demand notice which has to be sent to the defaulter. Now, once a demand notice is sent, what consequences it has? The rules provide that the moment a demand notice is received by the debtor, he is in fact restrained from alienating any property. If I say the words restrained, it is in fact wrong. The rule says any transaction, any transfer of interest by the debtor after receipt of a demand notice is void. So it goes to the extent of even declaring transactions as void after the issuance of demand notice. This is a very interesting area because many people may not know that when you go for a purchase of property, whether the person has suffered a recovery certificate or not. So that is not in the public domain. So therefore, there is a requirement as an advocate to be apprised of all these provisions so that effectively we will be there to defend our claims. So second stage, which I have pointed out as far as the DRT Act is concerned, other than adjudication by the presiding officer, adjudication process by the recovery officer. Now, having said this, what are all the appeal remedies? Now, as regarding the decisions which the recovery officer makes, there is an appeal remedy to the presiding officer under section 30 of the Act. One interesting aspect is that by way of a recent amendment, the section 30A is included, which makes a requirement of a pre-deposit to be made if there is a challenge of a recovery officer's order. So throughout this enactment, these are the various shortfalls or the stringent measures which step in saying that whenever at the next stage, there will be something which will be disturbing the debtor because he will not have an automatic remedy. So against the recovery officer's order, an appeal remedy to the presiding officer, but pre-requirement is that there is a pre-deposit to be made. Likewise, as against the final order of the presiding officer in the original proceedings, an appeal will lie to the Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal. Now again, appellate tribunal, the appeal is under section 20. Now words interesting again here is that any person agreed by the order. So in a case where a person was not party to the list, he was neither a defendant nor a applicant, whatever it is. But still, if he had been affected by the order, if there is a grievance, then he can go via an appeal under section 20. So any person aggrieved can also appeal against the order of the presiding officer. It also says the words which are used in the civil courts, whenever we speak about an appeal provision, we normally say judgment, decree, order. Now here the provision says a decision of the tribunal made or seems to have been made. So it brings within its scope a wider power for the appellate authority to interfere or to intervene. So it says any decision made or seems to have been made. There is a provision of appeal under section 20. And as in the other case also, whenever there is a right of appeal for a debtor, there is a requirement of fee deposit under section 21. Now, jurisdiction of the DRT, when we speak about all these things, there are issues as to multiple lending, multiple institutions, financial institutions, banks having claim. So all those have also been addressed. In fact, section 19(2) says that as against one debtor, if there is a claim by the bank, and if another bank also has a claim against the same person, they can seek for making their claim in the very same proceedings. So likewise, under section 19, when it speaks about adjudication, it also speaks about companies which are in liquidation, what is the procedure. Then interestingly, it also speaks about one orders being passed under section 19 application. Is there any scope for deciding the other parties' right and orders, whether it can, part of adjudication can address all those things. So these are all which is there. So as I said, as far as DRT and DRTs are concerned, one primary area is the provisions of the DRT Act, claims and applications which come under the DRT Act. Now adjudication by the presiding officer, then I said adjudication by the recovery officer, then appeal provision before the DRT. So this is all on the DRT Act. This is the first part of it. Now let us come to the second part of it. SARFAESI Act also says that any adjudication in respect of measures coming under SARFAESI Act being challenged can be only before the DRT and DRAT. Now under the SARFAESI Act, essential portion as far as this discussion is that enforcement of the security interest. Let us not get into asset reconstruction companies and their powers, everything. So enforcement of the security interest is provided under section 13. Now 13 says, notwithstanding anything under section 69 and 69A of Transfer of Property Act, a secured creditor. Again, definition of secured creditor is provided. Who can be a secured creditor and who is entitled to invoke the provisions of SARFAESI Act. Now then it speaks about secured debt. Then it speaks about creation of security interest. Now then ultimately it speaks a debtor who has created a security interest in favor of all these institutions, any of these institutions, and they being a secured creditor is entitled to invoke the provisions of section 13 for enforcement of that security interest created in their favor without intervention of court. Therefore, the banks can on their own enforce the security and realize the money. This is the simple words. Now, how do they do? Section 13 provides that you have to give a demand notice at the first instance under section 13(2) with a period of 60 days for the debtor to discharge or raise any objections or send any reply. If it is not complied with, 13(4) sets out 4 different stages or 4 different measures which can be exercised. Now, who can exercise under the SARFAESI Act? Secured creditor is entitled to invoke, but when it comes to the measures under 13(4), it sets apart a specified person called as authorized officer. He is the person who can exercise this right to invoke measures against a security interest. Authorized officer is defined under the rules. Now, procedures as regarding issuance of demand notice, post 60 days period, if demand notice is not complied with, how the enforcement happens is by issuance of a possession notice and taking possession, or by takeover of management, or by appointing a person after taking over a possession. So these are all the provisions. Now these provisions, how to be put into force, is provided or aided by the rules and the formats provided there. Now, having said this, that there is a right for the secured creditor to enforce the provisions, enforce the security interest without the intervention of the court. Now, there would be naturally a person who is aggrieved of it. Now, what is his remedy? Now, that is what is provided under section 17 of the SARFAESI Act. Section 17 says that a person aggrieved by the measures taken by the secured creditor can approach the DRT by filing an application and seeking for a relief as against such measures. So 17 enables the person to approach the DRT. What is the adjudication which the DRT can make is given under section 17(2)(3) everything. Now, any challenge as regarding an action under SARFAESI. Why I am emphasizing this word any challenge is that though on a plain reading we may see that an enforcement of security interest is done by a securitator and a person aggrieved goes and challenges that measures before the DRT. Now, in practice, what has happened, whenever there is an enforcement of a security interest, so many challenges come up. In the sense, the real person who is a debtor may not be an affected person. There may be a person who is a third party to the transaction. There may be a person who is a tenant or an occupant in a property. There may be cases where, by way of certain fraudulent means or other means, a security is created over a property and the owner is nowhere concerned with the particular transaction. And instances where you create a security for a particular facility standing as a guarantor, and the bank ultimately claims that there are so many other facilities for which you have extended the security. So all these instances step in. So therefore, a remedy is required for all these persons. Now, what interestingly happened is that whenever these third parties, they found that I am not a debtor, I am not a borrower, I am not a guarantor. Why should I step into the DRT and seek for challenge? I am not concerned. Let me go to the civil court and agitate this issue. I will ask for a declaration that I am the owner of the property. I will ask for a declaration that the mortgage is invalid. I will ask for a declaration that the measures taken are invalid. Now, interestingly, there have been cases where persons say that I have a partition interest in the property. This is my ancestral property. There could not have been a mortgage created over this by my father, my uncle, or whosoever. So all these people went before the civil court. Now, over the period of time, as I said in the case of DRT Act, in SARFAESI Act also, Section 34 specifically barred the jurisdiction of a civil court in matters where the jurisdiction has to be exercised by DRT. It used the word saying that in matters where the jurisdiction has to be exercised by DRT. Now, this aspect has been interpreted by the courts, by High Court and Supreme Court, saying that any claim, if you claim that there is a partition interest, and if it is effectively at the stage when there is an enforcement which has happened, your right is also before the DRT. Go before the DRT and establish that there could not have been a security interest created. Rather, there is no interest in the property which they could have created by way of a mortgage. So this particular area has gone for a huge jurisprudence in the sense that many judgments have come, and ultimately all the judgments drive to the point that a challenge in respect of measures taken under SARFAESI can be only before the DRT. So this is the vast area of the jurisdiction exercised by DRT. And naturally, once the DRT exercise jurisdiction, your other remedy is a DRAT. This we normally know. This we normally come across because many instances you will find that you go to the DRT and question an action, and DRT passes an order saying that no, you don't have any locus or something like that. It goes to the very basis, very foundation of it, dislodging you on the challenges made before the DRT. Then we rush to the High Court saying that High Court has got a jurisdiction under 227. Now the DRT failed to exercise a jurisdiction. Our case in the High Court would be that DRT failed to exercise a jurisdiction. Therefore, you intervene. Now this was also happening till point of time. Now after a period of time, the courts came and said that no, these are all specialized tribunal established under special enactments. And as and when there are remedies provided under the Act, be it an order of DRT, then you have an appeal remedy under DRAT. So therefore, the court said, you exercise only the appeal remedy, don't rush to the High Court. So very rare cases where High Court interfered. In all other cases, the hierarchy is such that a challenge is before the DRT, post an order before by the DRT, and appeal remedy to the DRAT. Now at the DRAT, again in the case of SARFAESI appeal, there is a precondition. So this again went for so many litigations before the High Court and Supreme Court as to who has to make this deposit, what is the deposit amount. Now in a DRT Act, the pre-deposit to be made under Section 21 was on the amount determined by the tribunal, because you are coming against an order of the tribunal. So you know what is the determination of the debt. So once it is determined, when an appeal comes under Section 20 and 21 pre-deposit set, amount determined. Now in SARFAESI Act under Section 18, when an appeal is maintained before the appellate tribunal, and there is a requirement by way of a proviso which says that there is a pre-deposit to be maintained, pre-deposit to be made for maintaining the appeal. The words it used is that as demanded by the secured creditor. So therefore, whatever has been demanded by the secured creditor becomes the determinable amount. On that amount, there is a pre-deposit which is normally 50% with a discretion to the DRAT to reduce it to 25%. Now, interestingly, without a pre-deposit, no debtor can maintain any appeal, whether it is DRT Act or SARFAESI Act, before the appellate tribunal. So this is what is the scheme of things as regarding these two areas. So having said this, the more of a responsibility of a counsel when the matter is being dealt with at the DRT. So whatever defenses we have, whatever cases we have, whatever niceties which we can look through, and whatever non-compliances in case of SARFAESI or in cases of claim by the banks, you have to look into the regular provisions of the enactment like Contract Act, Negotiable Instrument Act, Transfer of Property Act to establish the fact that there can be a debt or there cannot be a debt. And if it is an agreement, financial agreement, what is the rate of interest, whether the bank has rightly applied, whether the bank's claim is rightly in accordance with law. All issues have to be decided by the DRT, or rather raised before the DRT. And one effective forum would be the DRT. So as young lawyers, it is your primary duty to ensure that you are thorough with the provisions and look into how the jurisdiction is vested. What is the scope of the jurisdiction? Look into what is the adjudicatory mechanism it is provided. Whenever we file an application under Section 17 challenging the measures, many a times I have seen that they don't even look into what is the relief which the DRT can give. See in Section 17.2 and 17.3. Now that adjudication process of the DRT under 17 had also gone for a change by way of an amendment. Originally, what was provided is said that if the measures are found to be not in accordance with the provisions of the Act and rules, the possession can be restored to the borrower or the mortgagor, was the original provision. Now that has been amended. Now they said the possession has to be restored to the person who is aggrieved and to pass such other orders. Now, interestingly, under the SARFAESI Act, apart from your remedy against the measures, there is also a provision by way of Section 19 which provides for seeking compensation in respect of wrongful actions by the authorized officer or the secured creditor. So these are the things which we have to take note, and for each aspect there is many case laws. There is a lot of jurisprudence which is there in the available in the law books, which you have to cull out and ensure that this is done. Now, having said about the second enactment, namely the SARFAESI Act and the jurisdiction powers as to the SARFAESI Act, the third portion of it is the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Code. Now, interestingly, third part of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code recognizes DRT as an adjudicating authority and DRAT as the appellate authority. Now, in this third part, it deals with insolvency resolution and bankruptcy of individuals and partnership firms. Now, as of now, this part is not fully notified. Why I say not fully notified is that by way of a notification, they have partly notified as regarding individuals who stand as guarantors for corporates. So in cases where there are individuals who stood as guarantor to a corporate, and if a measures and if the insolvency resolution has to be initiated against such individuals, it comes under Part 3, and therefore there is a jurisdiction of DRT and DRAT as on date partly of Part 3 by virtue of the notification of central government. Now the entire Part 3 is not notified. The day is notified, it is going to again have a huge litigations which will flow to the DRT and DRATs, because on the individual insolvency that has been dealt with till now under the Provincial Insolvency Act, Presidency Towns Insolvency Act, where civil courts were exercising the jurisdiction throughout the state. Now, by virtue of this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that jurisdiction is now going to come to the DRT. Now, having said this, I earlier also pointed out the jurisdiction and powers of DRT under the DRT Act was amended by virtue of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So it was amended to the extent saying that earlier when the constitution establishment of the DRT provision is there under Section 3, it said the central government by notification may establish. for the purpose of the particular enactment. Amendment under the IBC said that central government may establish a tribunal for the purpose of exercise of powers of Part 3 under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Interestingly, they made one more sub-provision. They're saying that the DRT, while exercising powers, shall also have a right to have circuit sittings in the districts. So therefore, they were conscious of the fact the moment Part 3 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is notified, the DRTs will have a huge work. To our knowledge, as of now, you know that DRTs are functioning only from Chennai, Coimbatore, and Madurai in the state of Tamil Nadu. In other states, you have only in one places like Kerala, you have only in Ernakulam, in Karnataka, you have only in Bangalore. So once this Part 3 is notified, this is also going to have an effect in terms of expansion of jurisdiction for all the areas. Therefore, the amended provision. So have a reading of the enactment as amended as of now, where you will find interestingly various provisions are amended in tune with the requirement of exercise of jurisdiction. And one such thing is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now, I have also put out one small chart as far as this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. I will try to bring it on the screen so that you can have a look at it. Though it has not been fully in place, you can find it that I hope you get the screen. So various points, whichever in fact I have said through, I have also captured in this note. I will try to circulate. And one thing on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is concerned, I don't know whether it will be able to catch up in the screen. Let me make a try. Yes, I think it's a kind of overriding. So let me not get into it. Effectively, if you see in cases of individual insolvency, the adjudicating authority is named as an adjudicating authority. The DRT is called as an adjudicating authority. Now, in individual insolvency, the debtor himself can file an application. Once he files, the adjudicating authority will declare the insolvency to commence. Now, under the scheme of the enactment, the IBC code, it has got where an insolvency professional has to be appointed, and he will conduct the entire insolvency resolution. And if a creditor files, once he files, the adjudicating authority will consider it, refer it to an insolvency professional, and he is required to make a report. Now, only based on the report, insolvency will commence. And once insolvency commences, the DRT as the adjudicating authority also has to declare a moratorium. Now, post-moratorium, there is a time limit within which this insolvency of an individual has to be resolved. Now, within this time limit, there are various processes. Let us not get into that. It only speaks about the creditors coming into place, the claims of the creditors being called for, and creditors list finalized. Post that, in cases of individual insolvency, the individual is required to give a repayment plan. Now, this repayment plan has to be considered by the creditors, then the adjudicating authority. So therefore, the DRT as an adjudicating authority will exercise 3 or 4 powers. One is that it will be an adjudicating authority for the purpose of initiation of insolvency. It will be an adjudicating authority to approve a resolution, a repayment plan put forth by the debtor and agreed by the creditors. Then if in case the repayment plan is not approved or repayment plan is not forthcoming, the adjudicating authority will pass an order for liquidation. Then in the resolution as well as liquidation, it has got various powers as to determine what are all the excluded assets of a debtor, what are all the assets which has to be included in the liquidation estate or the resolution estate. Now, in that process, there are various things the IBC code provides as to preferential transactions to be decided and transactions to be nullified, which we find in the insolvency code, but IBC has given very new dimensions to various aspects. And all these resolutions has to be happening within a time period. So therefore, the DRT will be the adjudicating authority deciding, and any appeal is to the appellate authority at DRT. Now, having said that, as a concluding part, you can also note that once we say the DRT and DRAT are the authority as far as these 3 enactments is concerned. Now, under IBC, post decision by the DRAT, appellate tribunal, there is also an appeal remedy to the Supreme Court. Now, under DRT Act and SURFACI Act, effectively under the scheme of the enactment, all litigations or proceedings end with an order of DRT. You have to read in a manner that a DRT order is the final. Now, what is thereafter left is that normally we challenge those things on the illegalities or the failure to exercise jurisdiction before the High Court. So, under the scheme of the Act, there is no jurisdiction for the High Court. DRT orders are challenged before the High Court, invoking either 226 or 227. Then you take it to the Supreme Court by virtue of Article 136. Now, for the moment, if you keep away this Article 136 and Article 226 and 227, as far as these two enactments are concerned, the scheme puts to rest all adjudication process with the appellate tribunal. So, my final conclusions is that as far as young practitioners are concerned, the practice before DRT and DRAT is a very interesting area. Today, by virtue of these three enactments, it touches upon every aspect of life. Like certain tribunals, take the case of income tax or sales tax, which is only affecting only a few people. It doesn't go beyond that. Whereas this, though being called as a specialized tribunal, it touches upon the lives of each and every individual of a society. Because in a bank claim, you have huge industrial establishments, huge claims against companies, likewise claims against even an agricultural advance, claims against even an educational loan, claims arising from any personal loans which has been given if it crosses the threshold limit. Likewise, under SARFAESI Act also, enforcement happens in every aspect of it. At the moment IBC comes into full force, you will see more of the litigation which is happening. Now, with all experience, I will say that from my personal experience that I had a lot of learning as far as the practice from DRT, DRAT is concerned. Because the day I came into the profession, and immediately thereafter these enactments came into place. So therefore, our earlier stages in the profession and being attached to an office which was doing in commercial law, which was doing in banking sector, we had a lot of exposure, and this has built up. Now, a difference as regarding the other proceedings and the DRT proceedings is that civil courts, it gives you a different challenge. Of course, on the technicalities, take the case of Evidence Act, take the case of Civil Procedure Code, every aspect requires a technicality to be complied with. And you had a challenge that it may get defeated on those things. Now, DRT and DRAT, it becomes summary proceedings. One way looking at it that we lost those niceties of the civil courts as recording evidence, cross-examinations, all those things. But it gives a other strength that you have to prepare yourself and you have to effectively put forth based on whatever pleadings, documents, everything. So it is a strength measure which you can look at and establish yourself. Now, with these few words, I will conclude my session, and it can be open for any question and answers. It can be open for any clarifications, or any of my friends would like to add on anything which I have said. It is open. Thank you very much.
Yes. Now the guest can use the option of raise hand to put questions to the speaker. And Sir Venkatraman would like to ask you a question. I'll put you in touch with.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Venkatraman, sir. Hello.
Sir, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Sir, please accept our humble appreciation for a wonderful session, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, I have just two quick questions, sir. One is a technical question and the other one is factual.
Yes.
The first question is, when it comes to CERSAI,
yes,
there are two, I believe that it has been made mandatory before enforcement.
Yes.
Registration of creation of security interest has been made mandatory.
The central registry is provided under the SARFAESI Act originally. Now, establishment happened only in 2011, that's central registry. Now, post that with the 2016 amendment, it has been mandatory. In fact, now 2016 amendment sets out that priority should be decided in terms of the registration.
Wonderful, sir. My question is relating to that. There are two banks, A and B, over the same property. The first bank lends money by a mortgage, but does not register with CERSAI, with the central registry. B bank, a second charge holder, registers it soon after dispersing the funds, so soon after creation of security interest. at the time of enforcement, in the event of a default, would A bank, by virtue of being a first charge holder, will get priority, or the B bank, which has a security interest as well as registered with the central registry, will get priority, sir?
As per the latest amended provision, the priority will be based on registration. Now, having said that, we also have to look into the other aspect, is that the registration is only a kind of an administrative process. So registration with CERSAI also provides if there is a delayed period with payment of penalty. So at any stage, if you are able to register with penalty, it will date back to the original creation. So I'll assume from your question that this registration has never been attempted. It will go in terms of the priorities, in terms of the registration with the CERSAI.
Wonderful, sir. So my second factual question is,
yes,
I am a builder, a flat buyer, a home buyer has booked a flat which is worth about 1 crore. I had, after receiving 50% of the consideration, I had also registered UDS in the name of the home buyer. And he had parallelly, the home buyer had also taken a loan from a bank by creating a mortgage over this particular flat and the UDS. The home buyer defaults in payment of the EMI to the bank. As far as I am concerned, as a builder, the home buyer has not paid about 20 lakhs to me. The bank invokes SARFAESI action. It issues 13(4) notice and takes symbolic possession. But as they always say, before putting the property to auction, the bank, I believe, is mandated to take physical possession. So I, as a builder, refusing to give physical possession because the possession is retained with me, and I am claiming that I have a lien over the property. So will I be, as a builder, will I be able to attack the SARFAESI action by the bank? Or my intention is not actually to attack. Can I tell the bank that when you auction the property, first settle my 20 lakhs and take the rest? That's my question.
Yes, sir. To just answer the issue of which you have raised is that, one, there cannot be a lien because no statutory lien is recognized as far as builders are concerned. There can be a lien if it is provided in the agreement. Suppose the builder has entered into an agreement saying that till the last is paid to me, possession will not be given, and even if there is a charge created or anything, it will be only subsequent to our charge. If there is a provision in the agreement, then the bank will be bound by that.
Sorry to interrupt. There is a provision in the agreement.
If there is a provision in the agreement which says that till the last pi of the amount is paid and possession delivered, there cannot be an exercise of right. Then you will have a claim in terms of a charge over the property, and you can seek for your payment of dues. Rather, you can tell the bank that you are free to enforce, but you have to make my payment. This is one aspect of it. Other aspect of it, without getting into it also, if you read section 13(7) of SARFAESI Act, under section 13, when it speaks about the enforcement of the security interest by the authorized officer, various subsections provide various scenarios. One subsection speaks about appropriation of sale proceeds post-sale. So interestingly, in that subsection, it speaks any surplus which is left behind shall be paid to the person in terms of right and interest therein. It did not say shall be paid to the borrower. So, therefore, the builder will have a right to raise a claim before the authorized officer and say that after your sale, if there is a surplus, I have to be paid. This is one scenario. And as I said earlier, if you are able to establish and document that only if my payment is made, that you have a right to proceed with the further action, which is based on an agreement, you will have it. If this is not being complied with, you have a remedy before the DRT under section 17.
I can approach the DRT under 17 of SARFAESI itself, sir.
Yes.
To claim by requesting the DRT to issue a direction to the bank.
No, you will question the action saying that this has to be complied with. In compliance, in failure to comply these situations, the action is bad in law. So therefore, it will fall in the last category of the adjudication of 17(3), which says that such other orders.
Fantastic, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Terry, before the next person asked the question, was that question asked by Venkatraman?
I didn't get the full name correctly. I think Wilson said something like that only, Venkatraman.
Venkatraman of Rank Associates, is it? Venkatraman,
Sriram,
you can answer if you
Sriram
want.
sir. Yes, Sriram sir. Yes.
Oh, you Om. Om is,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Om is deliberately switching off his video so that you do not notice him. He is actually asking you for a case that he wants to file. Don't give him free advice. Don't give him free advice. Ask him to engage you and then consult with him.
I have a small request with Mr. Wilson. Can you unmute Mr. Sriram until the session is over, because he keeps on pulling everybody's leg.
No, rather I will put it this way. It will be more happier if more younger members of the bar come up with some queries, because they are the persons who have to be more enlightened on the subject, or rather they are the persons who have to be benefited of this session.
Absolutely.
So they can develop a practice on the DRT.
No, absolutely. Venkatraman is not a youngster. Okay, that was just in the lighter vein.
Yeah. Any other questions? Before somebody comes on the line, one more thing also I'll just say. Now, I have said that this bar of jurisdiction of the DRTs, the civil courts, where the jurisdiction is vested with the DRT. One judgment on that, very interestingly, if you see, 2014 1 SCC 479. This is a case of Jagdish Singh versus Hiralal. Now, that was an issue of a civil suit being filed, and the institution go before the civil court and say that the plaint has to be rejected. And the prayer and the civil suit was for a partition. Now, that has been dealt with. Ultimately, Supreme Court said that only DRT, you have to approach the DRT. Rather, they said that you don't have a claim for partition because after enforcement, you are trying to build up a case. Now, one interesting aspect which I found is that only one line, in fact, I felt that the Supreme Court could have gone at some length and discussed it or set out something. But one line they said, even section 9 of CPC will not have an application. Because section 9, you all know, under the Civil Procedure Code, it says that any claim can go before a civil court unless it is barred by any statute. So the very jurisdiction of civil court is very, very vast. So they used a line saying that even in terms of section 9, you cannot approach a civil court.
Okay.
That is in the case of health issues.
The next question is by Dr. N.V. Badrinath, the presiding officer of DRT1. So be careful when he asks you a question. It might be in respect of a case on which you are going to propose an argument before him. So just be a bit careful. Yeah. Yes.
Sriram, certainly not. Because the doubt I had with reference to the earlier question put by Mr. Venkatraman. Mr. Om Prakash, I always have a doubt on this. Tell me, can the possession that these builders claim, can it be called as a possession? The possession of a flat before it is delivered to the home buyer. Can they claim possession within the meaning of the definition of possession?
Sir, effectively what happened? Yes, sir. I will try to answer this in these two things. One is effectively, whenever this transaction of sale of a flat is happening, there are two documents which are essential. One is the sale deed conveying an undivided share of land. That is actually a document in which creates an interest in a property in terms of our Transfer of Property Act. Now that interest is an undivided interest. Now interestingly, any sale deed will say that on execution of the sale deed and registration, the possession is delivered. So let us assume one situation that the flat purchaser is now put in possession of an undivided interest. Now corresponding to this undivided interest, there is an obligation of the builder to construct and deliver to him a residential unit or a building to that extent. Now this building has to be delivered possession to him.
Yes.
Now this building possession will be governed by the document between the builder and the purchaser of the flat, which is a builder's agreement. Now as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, in terms of the latest amended provisions of Registration Act, everything, even a builder's agreement has to be registered. So this also becomes a registered document. So that builder's agreement recognizes a possession in respect of the built up area corresponding to the undivided share of land. Now, whatever that builder's agreement specifies as to the rights of a builder will have some kind of a statutory recognition and preference in terms of the interest being passed on. As I said, one interest is the undivided share of land. Now, that passes on the execution of sale deed and registration of the sale deed. The other is an obligation between the builder and the purchaser. Now, builder has to construct and deliver possession, purchaser has to leave. So, intervening this, the interest of the banker steps in the day when they lend loan and they take a security of this property. When they take a security of this property, they record it as a built-up area together with an undivided share of land, or an undivided share of land with a proposed construction thereon, whatever it is. So, depending on the documents and the wordings used in the documents and the time period which proposes in the document, this has to be decided.
That's fine. As far as the banker is concerned, what
Yes.
he needs is interest in the immovable property when
Yes.
he intends to proceed. Now, you see, normally a property owner,
Yes.
when he intends to get his property developed and enters into an agreement with a builder, that's called development agreement, which needs
Yes.
to be registered. Fine.
Yes.
Now, that development agreement envisages certain terms of sharing the built-up area, etc., etc. That is one part, and the next agreement flows from that will be between the buyer, intending
Yes.
buyer, and the builder, as well as the owner, with power
Yes.
of attorney or without, in case there is no
Yes.
power of attorney, owner himself. Now, in this tripartite situation,
Yes.
what I understand is the owner retains the possession till such time the entire built-up area is completed, right, and is delivered to the respective buyers.
Yes.
In case the agreement envisages sale of individual flats or undivided share, etc. In
Yes.
such time, the ownership lies with the, possession lies with the owner, and the builder is only a licensee. He is only a licensee and he can't claim possession.
Yes.
Why this analogy is, I remember a case where during my practice time, the builder had filed his case against the owner for an injunction, saying that I'm in possession and then the owner is trying to assert possession from me, except by process of injunctions. So the trial court granted injunction. Then we had, my argument was that it is only a license. I gave him permission to develop the
construct.
property. There cannot be any possession transfer, especially at least in such time. I execute some registered document delivering possession to him once it is built. In such time, it is not so.
Yes.
The matter went up to High Court, and the Andhra Pradesh High Court held that it is only a license,
Yes.
and the builder cannot claim possession. That means he just has a permissive possession or license.
Yes.
And he can deliver it only by a registered document with the consent of the owner.
Yes.
But there may be cases where at the initial stage itself, the builders purchase half share or whatever share they like. Those cases are different.
Different.
Definitely they get
Yes, sir.
possession.
Correct. Sir.
So this is but what is the possession? Now I'm not sure.
Yes, sir.
This
As far as the
is the
situation
situation.
which you set forth, sir, that position is correct. As far as the situation which you set forth, that there is a different landowner and there is a builder on a license he is constructing, the builder cannot claim any possession of the property. That
Because
is correct.
nowadays the builders are also coming before the tribunals,
Right.
saying that it should be stopped. Maybe he's agreed person, no doubt.
Yes.
But other ingredients probably appear lacking. So
Yes.
I want to clarify.
So these may come within that 13(7), where as regarding appropriation, it sets on something. And 17(3) also, such other orders which the tribunal can pass, which came by way of an amendment. So this is the area, in fact, which requires some kind of exposition and which has to create some more jurisprudence on it.
Certainly.
But unfortunately, as far as these claims are concerned, 70–80% all rest with the claims by the bank, and ultimately they get to succeed. Only very limited scope which we have to explore on these areas.
That is right. What you said is very much right. It needs to be widened. But there the problem appears to be that unless the measure is set aside, we can't invoke that clause 3. Basically, we have to set aside the
No,
measure.
if it is within that such other orders, even measure need not be set aside. It can be considered in terms of the appropriation as well as rights and remedies which are available.
Well,
So
if
one
it can be
purpose,
done,
one purpose of this session is that we thought, see, as far as these DRT cases are concerned, claims by banks and finance institutions, either DRT Act or SARFAESI Act, even before the brief is taken, advocates are predetermined. Okay, there is nothing more which we can find. It is a question of what is the payment to be made. But at least we thought in this session, junior advocates should think more about it, explore it, so that more of jurisprudence comes into place.
fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Rajashekhar is there.
Next question would be from CSK. Oh,
Okay, Rajashekhar is next in line. He has put up his hand.
yes.
Good evening, sir.
Satish,
Sir, Satish.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Satish.
Thank you for a wonderful session. My query will be this, sir.
Yes.
If there is an arbitration clause
Hmm.
in the agreement between bank and the borrower,
Hmm.
what would be the position now?
Hmm.
Because you will be well aware
Hmm.
that in pursuance to a full bench judgment of a Delhi High Court in HDFC case,
Correct.
earlier the matters filed before the Honorable DRT were used to be referred to arbitration.
Hmm.
And I believe the matter was taken to Supreme Court also.
Hmm.
And I believe that law holds good now also.
But HDFC
Well-
case under SARFAESI Act.
Oh,
The Delhi High Court HDFC case is a claim
Yes.
of SARFAESI. The issue was, once you invoke SARFAESI, arbitration cannot be continued.
no, if I am right, sir, I think it's pertained
Yeah.
to.
Okay, maybe. I am not sure about
Yeah,
it.
I am also not sure, sir. My query is there any amendment in this regard touching the jurisdiction of the DRT vis-a-vis arbitration?
No, there is
Or the
nothing in
old-
the Act. As it is, there is nothing in the Act. As
So
only
we
law
can,
made by the courts in the field.
so we have to get governed ourselves by the judgment of the Supreme Court, subject
Yes.
to applicability of the law.
Yes.
If it is
Yes.
SARFAESI or
Yes.
DRT.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
As it is, the DRT Act provision, if there is an arbitration clause, you go before arbitration. If the claim is more than 20 lakhs, they exercise the jurisdiction before the arbitration.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Next would be Rukmani Venugopalan.
Sir,
Rukmani,
good evening, sir.
Good evening, madam.
Sir, thank you so much for the informative session, sir, first of all. Sir, my question is, sir, a borrower mortgages a property which he thinks he has interest or which he thinks he has title with the bank and obtains loan. Ultimately, it becomes NPA and the bank enforces the property for recovery of the money.
Hmm.
But the problem is he had never title in the first place and the borrower also died. So can the DRT actually go into the question of the title of the borrower and actually set aside the enforcement of security, or should it be done by the civil case?
So, in terms of the prevailing law, DRT only has to decide that. You cannot go to a civil court. Once a security interest is created and at the stage of enforcement and issue is raised, then testing that, including whether there was a security interest created or not, including whether there was an ownership right over the property or not, has to be decided.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
next would be Ayyachami Ilongovan, sir.
Sir, good evening.
Good evening, Elaman.
Sir, my question is, once borrower failed to succeed while challenging the 13(4) possession notice, that is a symbolic possession, whether after taking possession under section 14, that is a physical possession, he once again can approach the DRT, sir?
He can, if he is able to show that this was again one more measure under 13(4). Now, what, effectively speaking, a 14 order cannot be challenged. That's what 14(3) says. Now, Supreme Court in this Kannaiah Lal as well as in the other case, they said, though a 14 order cannot be challenged, but the right of the bank to invoke 14 or the measure or the filing of an application is also to be treated as a measure under 13(4). Therefore, you challenge that. So in terms of which today, the invocation of 14 or the order which the bank is saying by exercising their right under section 14 and seeks to take possession will be a subject matter of challenge before the DRT. Now, if I am able to show that my earlier essay was challenging a possession notice where symbolic possession is taken, I failed. But in a subsequent action, the bank is now taking physical possession by enforcing an order under section 14.
Yes, sir.
And if there is a possibility to show me that there is some non-compliances or certain irregularities or violation of the provisions in that portion of exercise. Example, while 14 application is being filed before the magistrate, CMM or the district magistrate, there is a requirement of an affidavit to be filed and setting forth 9 points as to compliances.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If this is not done. So if I am able to show something on that, which requires an adjudication, then I am entitled to file it. Dehorse my earlier action having failed questioning the question notice.
Yes, sir.
Now, ultimately, what will be is that what is the remedy? So, remedy, what the DRT can adjudicate and provide you as a relief will be restricted. DRT today cannot provide you again a relief saying that possession is being delivered back to you. That possession notice which was issued has become final. And in terms of Supreme Court judgment, possession either symbolic or actual. There is no dichotomy.
Yes, sir.
So that is also a possession which vests certain rights with the bank.
Yes,
so
sir.
the relief which the DRT can give you only will be in respect of this act possession, this act of taking actual possession.
Yes, sir. Sir, one other question.
Yes.
Sir, in case of the Madhya Chemicals, there was a narrow scope of filing a civil suit in case of fraud, allegation of fraud.
Yes.
But if suppose the third parties are allowed to question the mortgage created in favor of the security debtor by the borrower, sir, DRT lacks with any civil court power to adjudicate upon the issues by way of evidence or look at the genuinity of the documents. Is not the civil court is the right remedy, sir?
It all depends on the fact situation. See, normally speaking, if there is an allegation of fraud and a case has been built up clearly establishing that there could not have been a mortgage created or the documents creating mortgage are not genuine, if all these things comes, it may be a scope for only a civil court. But one thing is that you must have gone through the judgment of Honorable Justice Ramasubramaniam when he was there in Madras High Court of a civil suit being rejected, saying that you have built up the pleadings as if projecting there is a fraud. So if the ultimate object is to defeat the action of the bank by way of some collusive action, then a civil suit may not lie.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Such action can be only part of the adjudication before the DRT.
Yes, sir.
So that issue is still hanging around, but repeatedly Supreme Court keeps on saying that whatever it is, you go to DRT first.
Yes,
so therefore, there can be a situation where the DRT may ultimately have to say that this is within the scope of civil court, therefore I will not decide it.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Rajasekhar wanted to ask something. He was putting his hand sometime.
Wilson, the presiding officer wants to ask something. Dr. Badrinath, yeah.
Take evidence.
Yes.
Because 17 provides for leading evidence by the parties.
Yes.
In cases where there is allegation of fraud, there certainly, if parties lead the evidence, then why not DRT consider it, whether
Yes, sir.
there is a fraud or not?
Yes, I failed to answer that portion. What you say is correct.
So we don't have any case so far where parties have let in evidence. Not only they have failed to let in evidence, they didn't even file an affidavit of evidence.
Yes.
Oral evidence, of course, may be exception, but even affidavits are not filed supporting that a particular plea taken.
Yes.
So they are just going by oral arguments. In that scenario, probably it would be very difficult to give any finding. But in cases where there is evidence let in, and if that suggests, probabilizes the theory of fraud, can we not give a finding that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In
Because all
fact,
questions relating to that can be decided by DRT according to all of you.
correct. My addition to whatever you have said, sir, what you said is absolutely correct. Addition to that, the enabling provision is 17.7 says. 17.7 says that while deciding an application under section 17, the provisions of DRT Act will apply. So reading into of the provisions of DRT Act is there. Now this was in fact interpreted by Supreme Court when the question of pre-deposit under 18 came up for consideration. They said 18.2 said you have to read the provisions of DRT Act, and DRT Act provided for condonation of delay, therefore under 18. So applying the same analogy, 17.7 says DRT Act will apply. But the moment you get into the DRT Act provides that there can be an evidence by way of affidavit. And in the DRT Act, by the decision of the Delhi High Court, Delhi Bar Association case, Supreme Court said if there is something which is beyond the documents which party wants to establish, there can be a case for a cross-examination of witness before the tribunal also. So reading into all those things, what you said, sir, there is a scope for considering all these aspects, and there is a scope to record evidence and decide matters in accordance with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, next question would be from Rajasekharan.
Yes, sir.
Rajasekharan, sir, please ask your question. Yes, sir, you're a little
Yes,
bit.
sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, sir, very good evening, sir. It's really nice lecture which we have heard today. So my question was already asked by somebody. I wanted to touch on the point of fraud as an exception to the bar under section 34. Because I myself happened to file a case before the district court Chengalpattu and got an interim injunction. There was a case where the document was, a fraudulent document was created, and the bank, I have taken a stand as a solution. The bank had given a loan and SARFAESI proceedings followed. They stayed with the DRT and then later on stayed with the civil court. There, as you had pointed out, I relied on Ramsing's judgment where the mention was about drafting. That is the word he has used. Clever drafting should not be. That's why he was able to establish that it's a fraud. Thanks for listening us.
Only thing, we don't have much of those cases actually being dealt with. The more you have a jurisprudence on that, it will be having a larger scope on it. Now, interestingly, one more point is that what happens is that all these claims come only an enforcement happens by the bank. That is becoming the testing ground. The moment an enforcement comes and you come up with the claim. So, bona fides are tested saying that all these days what you are doing, why it was not raised. Because in between there would have happened so many things. Imagine situations where third party property is dealt with a fraudulent transaction, still the EC registration is there, but they would not have taken action. So after enforcement, if it comes, courts have been a very strict saying that no, it is being enforced, now you are raising an issue, go before. If it is taken up at the earlier point of time, the civil court jurisdiction and pleadings, documents establishing the fact is more important.
In fact, in my case, we came to know only when the possession was taken because it's a vacant land. So when the bank interfered, only then we came to know about the fraud. So that is the case. So one more,
yes,
not a question, but my concern. See, most of the cases, no, as you had said, banks are always an advantage in a DRT. That is the general opinion. But cases where a guarantor approaches the court, even in the cases where the property which is originally mortgaged by the debtor would be sufficient for the loan amount, still the DRT doesn't interfere when a guarantor takes a point that let that property be bought first for auction instead of bringing my property into auction, because my property is more valuable. The banker used to bring that property without even touching on the other property.
But unfortunately, law is the other way. Even under SARFAESI Act, if you see 1311 specifically says, under the Contract Act also you have, and you have a lot of judgments which says that it is coextensive and you cannot have a plea that proceed only against the principal borrower at the first instance. This is well settled position of law. Now, in addition, SARFAESI Act specifically records that the bank can proceed against the guarantors, dehors their right to invoke 13(4)(a) to D against the principal borrowers. So that is the position of law.
But equity doesn't play a role.
Yes. When law steps in, equity is out. So far as law is not providing for a particular situation, there is a balance between equity and other considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The final question will be from Murthy Kandasamy.
Yes.
Murthy, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Sir, this is not a question. This is an information to be shared in continuation of Mr. Sati's query.
Yes.
I think Satish asked the query, the Arbitration Act will prevail over
Yes, yes. He referred to the full bench judgment of Delhi High Court.
That was
Yes.
yes, full bench judgment that relating to RDDB Act, not in relation to SARFAESI Act.
Okay, okay, okay.
Number two, that case in DRT, the borrower invoked Section 8 of the Arbitration Act,
Yes.
and that was allowed by the DRT and upheld by the DRAT. Then the matter was the bank to High Court. So before a settlement, HK Sikri and our Paul and Rajiv Sector, and it was upheld the fact that based on the argument of the bank itself, there is an arbitration agreement, because the agreement is for the bank to invoke the arbitration. We have decided not to invoke the arbitration and go under RDDB Act. Therefore, it is all good that the DRT can continue with our claim. That was negative, and it was confirmed by the High Court also. And I was told that.
So therefore, in terms of the Delhi High Court judgment as prevails today, if there is an arbitration clause, arbitration only will prevail. And if a Section 8 is filed before the DRT, the OA has to be stayed and directing the parties to invoke arbitration.
Exactly. But I got an order in 2-3 cases in DRT2 in our Chennai branch.
Okay. Thank you. That is a clarification. I did not examine that.
I guess anyone else would like to ask any questions? I guess the question and answer session is over. Sir?
Nobody else, Wilson?
No, sir. 1 second, sir.
Yeah.
We have Ananda Selvam. 1 second. Mr. Ananda Selvam.
Anand Selvam, kelunga. Unmute him, Wilson.
I'm trying to, but I'm unable to do. Can he do it by himself? Ananda Selvam, sir, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sir,
Yeah.
good evening, sir.
Good evening, Anand.
Sir, yes, sir. The situation is like this. That is, already civil suit is pending. During the pendency of the civil suit, the property is that mortgage or something, that is interest is created. Subsequently, NPA and the DRT, the bank is proceeding for the recovery. In this situation, whether the civil court is prevail or DRT proceeding will prevail.
It depends on what is the relief which is already sought for in the civil court. And if the civil court proceeds,
yes, sir. Please, sir.
And if the civil court proceedings was much earlier, even before the creation of security interest, that suit will continue. There will not be a bar to any of it. So naturally, there will not be a relief as regarding the SARFAESI Act.
Okay.
Now, post invocation of SARFAESI Act, it is now for the party to decide whether he will question the SARFAESI Act before the DRT on the point saying that civil suit is pending, which is much earlier to the creation of security interest. Therefore, in terms of the priorities or in terms of the pending list under the Transfer of Property Act, that will prevail. They should not proceed, and banks should also submit themselves to this proceeding. Or he can go before the same civil court and say that pending list, the mortgage is created, and that is sought to be enforced. Therefore, you restrain them from proceeding. This will be on the fact situation, and if all these things are satisfied, these two scopes are available is my view.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Sir, actually, I have a question. May I go with the question?
Yes, Wilson.
Sir, my question would be from Divakaran, our office junior, who is very shy to ask this question to you. What happens to an agricultural loan? How to enforce a security debt against it? As you know, you cannot take possession of the property which is against security interest rules. And what other way they can recover the loans?
See, if your question is on the recovery,
yes,
on an admitted possession, the bank also wants to accept that it is an agricultural property, therefore they are not proceeding under SARFAESI. They have every right to proceed under the RDB Act for seeking for recovery and enforcement of that mortgage. And if the claim is less than 20 lakh, they can go before the court.
Okay. I guess.
And as regarding enforcement against agricultural property, Section 31 exempts any action when a security interest is created against agricultural property. But what is an agricultural property? What is the nature of where this exemption steps in? Is again been a lot of jurisprudence. The two decisions of the Supreme Court is today prevailing. One in the case of Indian Bank versus Papi Reddyar, which is a three-judge decision. And second in the case of versus Blue Coat. They relied upon the earlier Indian Bank of India. Indian Bank and Papi Reddyar case, they settled the law on the fact they again handed back to the High Court to decide on. So these two are prevailing. Probably your friend can go through those two judgments. You will get some idea as to that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I guess our friend Divakaran would have been enlightened with that answer. Sriram, sir, if you want to say this.
Okay. Friends, thank you very much, friends, and the presiding officer of the Debts Recovery Tribunal. Thank you very much. The whole idea behind this particular series that we are doing is for it to benefit young lawyers, maybe 5 to 8 years at the bar in their day-to-day practice. That is why instead of this is the third in the series that we're doing, instead of saying the 1993 Act or the 2002 Act, I spoke to Om, and Om agreed immediately for a topic that would help juniors in their actual practice, which is why the way Om went about his presentation about the creation of the tribunals, the acts governing the particular field, the amendments, and then the procedures for filing, and then most importantly for many young lawyers, the defenses that can be raised. And due to the 2002 Act, what Om said was the suggestion to lawyers with reference to Section 17 and the prayers that can be sought for. I mean, all this, we just hope that, some young lawyers are benefited due to this, and they ensure that their knowledge of this particular field is enhanced. That, having said that, I'm really happy to see a lot of young lawyers who've attended today's webinar, including Dr. N.V. Badrinath, Raj Shekhar of Seshadri and Company, DS, as he is called, D. Srinivasan, Bharat, N. Damodaran, and Mr. P.V. Muralidhar. Namala young lawyers tha. Adala onnu sandegame kadiyadu. And
P.V. Ramachandran.
P.V. Ramachandran as well. I'm sorry, Ram. I'm really sorry.
I am also young now.
We're all very, very young, and I'm also happy that the slightly senior lawyers, that is the classmates of Om, like Anbalagan and S.S. Balaji and S. Rajendra Kumar, I'm happy that all of them have also come. I'm sure Om knows what I'm talking about. Om and me, we approximately, Om is 1992 enrollment, I'm 94 enrollment. We have many disqualifications in common, which is not to be discussed here. We used to meet a lot at the DRT, which is why I'm sure with his office background, Om has developed into such a fine exponent of these couple of acts in this particular field. And there was no question of Om thinking or referring to his diary or appointment book when I call and ask him. Immediate answer was a yes. Thank you very much, Om. I'm sure I'll be troubling you for future assignments as well.
Sure.
Anybody else wants to say anything, or we shall
Thanks for all the friends who have joined. Many seniors probably trying to find out whether I stand up to the mark. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We shall keep you informed of the next. We shall keep you informed of the next webinar series that is being done by us. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you,
special thanks to Dr. N.V. Badrinath for having joined us. Thank you. Wilson, he wants to say something.
Oh, 1 second, sir. I didn't see.
Yeah. I think you yourself can unmute. Just tap your.
Yes, sir. Yeah. He can speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity and the invitation extended to me. I'm sorry I could not be there from the beginning, because at the same time, today we had a meeting with DFS. That's also a video conference. So I missed a major part of the speech, the on the topic by Mr. Om Prakash. Hope he has some text, and if possible,
Yes, sir, I will
please
share,
forward
sir.
it to me. I'll go through that. Thanks.
We'll send you the recorded link.
Really informative. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for joining, sir.
Right. Bye.
I think we can wrap up the session. Sir. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Om, thanks, Om. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sriram.